In games of 40k there's a lot going on, but today let's talk about 4 lesser rules that might give you small advantages if you can remember them. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're just talking a few generalist rules for Warhammer 40k, ones that I've certainly seen either myself or the other player either forgetting or maybe just not using optimally. Playing a 40k game well really does have quite a lot going on, and to really play every single aspect of your army optimally requires you to be juggling the needs of destroying the enemy, scoring primary objectives, scoring secondaries, and protecting yourself against the opponent wherever possible. I think it's not too surprising that some of the lesser used rules do get overlooked from time to time, and to be honest perhaps they aren't all that important to remember compared with getting the big stuff right. Even so though, the more options that you have for getting an advantage over the enemy army the better. So with that in mind, I thought we'd talk through 4 rules that I've recently managed to forget myself or seen other people doing so. The first one is one of the least used core stratagems from the main rulebook, cut them down. I'd say that of any of the ones on offer there, this is usually going to be the weakest or most niche, and it's the one command point stratagem to punish an enemy from falling back, maybe making them eat a few mortal wounds if you do have tons of your own models in combat. It costs 1 command point, and when the enemy falls back, you roll 1d6 for each model from your army that's within engagement range, and for each time that you roll a 6, the enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. The reason it's so niche is that you'll just struggle to get enough models into engagement range to actually matter. Even say a big unit of orc boys, maybe getting 10 or more models into engagement range, will still only do 1 or 2 mortal wounds when the enemy falls back, and that's just often not going to be worth it for the 1 command point. Models and extra ranks or anything won't help you whatsoever, as it's only the ones that are actually in engagement range. Usually 1 or 2 mortal wounds just isn't really worth writing home about, but there could be times when it really could be crucial just to slice off the last mortal wound of one enemy. I had a game recently where my character wanted to fall back from an enemy unit. He had 1 wound left after the combat, so he was just clinging to life, and my opponent decided to use this with his Imperial Knight, just literally for the 1 in 6 chance to kill the character. Obviously most of the time that's not going to happen, but if it's the difference between an enemy commander escaping and fighting on to buff the rest of the army for the rest of the battle, or if he's about to use some sort of shenanigans to jump back into combat and destroy something important, even a 1 in 6 chance could potentially be worth it there, and obviously it's far better if you have a whole bunch of models in combat with them. It could still be potentially valuable enough to be worth considering if you have a ton of models in on a very elite unit where they have a high points cost per wound, maybe things like Rebute Gilliman, or very expensive 1 wound models, say maybe Eldar Dark Reapers. It's still rarely going to be worth it, but it could just give you a Hail Mary chance to get an absolutely massive swing in the game if it's about killing 1 character that's got 1 wound left. Next up, I just wanted to talk about Heroic Intervention. Certainly something that we're all quite used to in 9th edition, that might still catch out newer players. I still find myself making mistakes sometimes, particularly when positioning my own characters or units in a way that would have been a lot more sensible and would have given them a much better Heroic Intervention threat range if I just moved them a few inches over. Obviously it's a rule that you never really want to forget exists. If you accidentally put a unit within Heroic Intervention range of an enemy character, you could be getting absolutely massive damage on them. If it's the difference between an entire new fight phase for a big enemy combat unit, then you might just have thrown away one of your units for literally no reason at all. Also, you might be cheating yourself out of loads of damage if you do miss the opportunity to heroic intervene with something sensible. If you're playing an army you're less familiar with, it might be worth asking your opponent to ask if they have any units that can do heroic interventions unusually. A few examples are Chaos Beast of Nurgle, they have it on their datasheet. Sanguinary Guard can do it with a stratagem, as can Feet of Bloat Drones for the Death Guard, could be very scary with a Flesh Mower, or Necron Canoptic units in general, such as Scarabs. There are tons of other examples as well scattered throughout 40k. The entire Space Wolves army, Custodians on objectives, any enormous vehicles that happen to be characters as well, such as Imperial Knights. The list really goes on, and it's not something you really want to fall afoul of. When you are heroic intervening, bear in mind you don't even need to end up in melee if you don't want to. You could literally just use it for an extra couple of inches on your character's movement, even if it doesn't make sense to heroic intervention into a squad, say one that would have killed them normally anyway. Finally, getting back to positioning as I talked about earlier, it's often worth preemptively positioning heroic intervention characters in a way that's helpful for you after they've moved. Sometimes you might be able to defend certain units with a heroic intervening character, say a Space Marine Smash Captain defending a tank if the enemy chooses to charge it from a certain angle. Or perhaps more importantly, making sure that you're in perfect position to heroic intervene if the enemy tries to contest your objective. Say you've got a bunch of Sanguinary Guard on an objective in the midfield, If you position them so they're directly over the objective and covering all approaches, it means that your opponent can't just put an OBSEC unit right next to the objective and whisk it away from you, without giving you the chance to heroically intervene with a bunch of angry Space Marines. Definitely one of the more subtle rules of Warhammer 40k, and a big deal if you use it to the full advantage. Next we've got a short but fairly simple one, pistols and grenades. Not much too intelligent to say about these ones, other than just remember that your characters and units have them. If you've chosen not to fall back with a bunch of units, make sure that any that happen to have random pistols fire them early in the shooting phase. They're not going to be able to target anything else most of the time, so it makes sense to do them before you forget about them. Just rarely as well, you might have enough pistol fire to actually gun down an enemy unit. If you've only got a couple of flimsy models left in combat with you, you might be able to finish them off with pistols, and that might actually allow your squad to go on and charge something else if you get lucky. Might be worth remembering that in the movement phase as well. Sometimes it could genuinely be better to leave your squad in a combat if they think that they can gun down the model with a pistol, and then they won't have fallen back, so they can still go on to charge. Grenades are another useful thing to remember that you have. If you're within 6 inches, they're often more powerful than the basic squad's weapons, though not always. Characters can be a particularly good source of them, particularly ones that don't have any ranged weapons at all because they're fighting with melee gear, or just say throwing a crack grenade instead of a standard bolter round, and never trust them to do any reliable damage output at all. Again, could be a candidate for firing early, seeing what they do, and then choosing where to allocate your actual important firepower. I would bear in mind the trade-offs with these as well, of getting pistols and grenades in range, and sometimes it might actually be in your interest to forget about them. If it's going to make the difference between a fragile unit getting up and exposing itself to the absolute maximum of enemy return fire, it might just be best to back off and lie low for a bit, rather than trying to get in a tiny little bit of extra damage that's unlikely to do much. Depends on the exact situation, sometimes it might be worth it, sometimes totally not. Finally, and a rule that I seem to very rarely ever see used, is Defensible Terrain. It's one of the most common terrain traits. A lot of things have it, such as ruins and ruined walls, woods, defense lines, and industrial structures. You get to use this rule if your infantry squad is entirely on or within a piece of area terrain, or at the other side of a defense line from an attacking unit. You need to use it when your opponent's unit declares a charge, and then your unit gets the option of either boosted Overwatch, Overwatch hitting on a 5+, or setting to defend, meaning that you can't fire Overwatch at all, but you add +1 to your hit rolls in the ensuing fight phase. Obviously you'll be taking the second one if you're not intending to fire Overwatch. This one will boost your damage output by a bit, no matter which one you choose. It could actually genuinely be quite significant on an Overwatching unit, provided you got enough firepower to actually make Overwatch worth it in the first place. It might just about tip the scales into whether or not your one command point is a worthy investment to hopefully gun down an enemy model or two on the charge. Maybe say you had a 10-woman sister of battle squad in cover. Ordinarily you might expect to get 3 or 4 bolter hits on the enemy when overwatching, but if you're in defensible terrain you might get around about 7. It's a lot more worth it and could be potentially worth the command point. If not though, you may as well use the other one. It's literally free increase to the damage output. Sure, your unit might not survive to fight, but if they do, then hitting on +1 doesn't hurt. I think the rule's perhaps forgotten about a bit, just because it's rarely all that significant. Making sure your entire infantry unit is in cover might not actually be worth it for the small extra bonus. If say that's going to limit your positioning, stop things from being in range, or stop you from being on an objective. Even if you are in the right place though, it still might not have any effect. The Overwatch boost might still not be significant enough to be worth the command point, and if your enemy is charging you, you might just be wiped out before you get to fight. Obviously that'll make any boosted hit rolls a touch redundant. Still though, definitely worth thinking about if it comes up. If you've got some really durable hard-hitting units, it certainly makes being in cover that bit more important. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed a little discussion around some of the slightly more fringe rules of Warhammer 40k, and please let me know if there's anything else that you find yourself forgetting from time to time. I'm sure there's plenty more examples like this scattered throughout the game. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep these videos coming. I tend to have new videos out for Warhammer 40k pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the vids on the channel, I'd just quickly like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which there's a link to down in the video description below. If you have been enjoying a lot and would like to help keep the videos coming, that's the best way to do so, as it allows me to focus on getting so many out. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.